There are less than 10 days remaining in the current Overwatch 2 competitive season, and I know a lot of you out there are looking to end on a high note. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down some tips that should help you carry more of your solo queue games, hopefully leading to a new peak before the season ends. And of course, if you're looking for more content like this, you should check out the GameLeap website. We've got hundreds of guides for Overwatch 2 as well as plenty of other games that will go more in depth than the average stuff you find on YouTube. We've got courses organized by role and by hero, step-by-step ability and map guides, and lots more. So be sure to check it out. Click this link to get your membership started. Before getting started, I want to make a note here that these tips will not be for specific heroes or roles, but are general advice for every character and every role in the game. Regardless of what you play, you should be able to learn something here. Alright, now let's get into it. My first tip is to play for your life. Fairly straightforward. Being able to carry in a game like Overwatch means being able to take control of chaotic situations. If you're constantly being sent back to the spawn room, you're not exactly in control of the situations around you. In short, you can't do anything else when you're dead. This means that whenever you're looking to get aggressive, you should be able to do that without dying. Don't be afraid to take yourself out of a fight to get healed up or just to regroup with your teammates. The best players out there are always trying to push this limit further, trying to get more and more out of their life, but of course, as soon as they start getting punished, they'll readjust. If you ever find yourself in a constant death loop, try to slow things down. Take your time before going into the next fight, and try to ask yourself if you're tunneling too hard on targets or maybe ignoring too many things going on around you. My next tip is to understand your role as much as possible. And I'm not just talking about tank, DPS, or support, but the unique roles that your specific hero choice will offer. Obviously, tanks will like to hold space, DPS like to find kills, and supports like to keep everyone alive, but the unique roles your hero finds can be dependent on your kit and the context around you. When figuring out your specific role for an upcoming team fight, try to ask yourself whether or not you're starting the fight for your team or trying to end it for them. Let's take a very flexible hero like Tracer as an example. A Tracer trying to start a fight favorably for her team will probably take a position on a flank and poke and prod at the enemy, dancing around them with blinks, making sure they waste their time, attention, and maybe even cooldowns on Tracer herself rather than use them for something else in the teamfight. Forcing an enemy to waste important resources or splitting up their attention when they're trying to focus is a great way to set your team up for success. On the other side of things, if Tracer is trying to end the teamfight in her favor, then she's looking for important kills and she's looking to find them as efficiently as possible. She'll likely still set up on the flank, but maybe instead of poking, she'll stay hidden until a target becomes vulnerable. She might even wait to see her target waste important cooldowns in the front line so that she can isolate them and they won't have anything to react to her damage with. Think of it this way. If you're looking for value for yourself, you better be sure you can find those kills. If you're looking to set someone else up for success, then you should be trying to burn through enemy resources as much as possible. Moving on, my next tip is to play meta heroes. As a coach, I firmly believe that you can play any hero in the game and still improve, become a better player, and carry more games regardless of meta. But that being said, ongoing balance means any given hero will become stronger or weaker depending on the patch. It is important to be able to keep up with these trends in an evolving game environment like Overwatch. If you want to give yourself the best chance of success, there's really no reason not to pick a meta hero, assuming that you're able to play all your heroes to the same skill level. And don't forget that heroes can be considered meta for very different reasons. Some heroes are considered meta for their strong damage potential, like in the one-shots we're seeing from heroes like Widowmaker and Sojourn currently, while others might be considered meta because they're just so difficult to counter or punish. Orisa and Kiriko are great examples of this right now. My next tip is to make informed plays. Take your time to scout out the battlefield before you go all in during a fight. Take note of important enemy positions so you don't accidentally wander into a dangerous sightline. Look out for any important cooldowns you'll need to avoid that might shut down your play, or once they are used, look to punish enemies who no longer have them. And of course, make sure your team is around to help you finish your targets, or at least make sure they're engaging at the same time so that you're not the only one getting shot at. If you're looking for ways to push this advice deeper, you can start doing things like trying to track enemy ultimates, as well as not only planning out plays of your own, but how the enemy is going to react to your plays and how you're going to play around that. My next tip is to play for your team, but not to trust them. Overwatch is a team game, so whenever possible, we want to use that to our advantage by getting more in sync with our teammates in order to overwhelm our enemies. We've already talked about various ways to do this, like focusing down the same target together or setting each other's plays up for success, but we don't want to assume that our teammates are thinking the same way we are. Don't rely on things like compositional synergy, communication, or just general team play from your allies, because things that are obvious to you might not be obvious to them. If you want to be able to solo queue carry any of your games, you need to be able to work with a team that is less than synergized. So when I say you shouldn't trust your team, what I really mean is don't have any expectations for them. Don't expect them to follow you up every time you go in, and don't expect them to sacrifice themselves so that you can get play of the game every time. In order to do this, you need to be able to mold your playstyle around whatever you see your teammates doing. You might be able to set up a perfect dive as Winston, but when your backline DPS of Torb and Bastion can't follow you, it's not really going to matter. Or you might be trying to hold the corner as Reinhardt, denying space to the enemy, but it's not going to matter when your teammates keep losing to duels on the flank. If this is happening in your games, you need to make sure that your play suits theirs, even if theirs seems suboptimal or not what you want to do. Even if what your teammates are doing is objectively wrong on paper, it doesn't matter once you're in game. You need to focus on working together to find success. Don't forget that one person making a mistake is feeding, but 5 people making the same mistake is team play. This means you'll have to do things like slow yourself down if you're a faster hero than your team, or move into potentially suboptimal positions assuming they benefit your team to be there. My next tip is to adapt to enemy threats. At all times, you need to respect the ability of the enemy to make plays against you. Don't be afraid to challenge them, but make sure you're stacking things in your favor with positions, cooldown management, and by manipulating their focus. So adapting to these kinds of threats means keeping track of all those things, where they're positioned, how they're using their cooldowns, and who they're focusing. If you don't have an advantage in one or more of those areas, you probably want to avoid taking a duel with that enemy. But since fights in Overwatch develop so quickly, those types of advantages could pop up at any moment. Save your best playmaking tools in order to punish those moments when enemies find themselves at their weakest, instead of trying to throw them all at the wall immediately and hoping something sticks. With this tip, we can also talk about adapting to enemy players, not just heroes. If there's a standout player carrying for the enemy team, it's probably worth putting more attention on them and trying to outplay them more specifically. This could include things like swapping your hero out entirely in order to better counter that threat, but even without swapping, you should likely be able to just change up your playstyle and put more attention to them to make sure that your plans find success despite how threatening they are. Let's use 2 dueling Widowmakers as an example here. If the enemy Widowmaker just keeps popping heads of your team and is too threatening to take in the 1v1, maybe you can make some adjustments. Swapping to a flanker like Tracer or Genji could allow you to harass the Widowmaker out of position, preventing her from taking shots safely. Or if you're electing to stay as Widowmaker because you're still confident in taking the duel, you can at least try to manipulate the enemy Widowmaker's focus. Try hanging back and letting the enemy Widowmaker take her shot first. This will make it easier for you to peek since she likely won't be hovering her crosshair right at your head level, and also means that you'll be able to line up your shot on her more easily since she's likely given away her position by shooting. Alright, moving on. My next tip here is to learn to read and play around macro advantages. So we've already talked about individual advantages by manipulating positions, cooldowns, and focus. But now let's talk about the bigger picture. I'm going to separate macro advantages into 2 categories, major and minor ones. Major advantages are pretty obvious, like finding kills or when your team is using ultimates, and minor advantages happen when your team stacks up enough of those individual advantages, having strong positions, using high value cooldowns, and having strong damage windows. Start with the obvious stuff first by keeping eyes on the kill feed and checking the scoreboard every now and then to check up on the ultimates your team has available. If we find some early kills or have a bunch of ultimates to dump into the next fight, we should expect to fight with macro advantage. Likewise, if the same is true for the enemy, we should find ourselves in disadvantage. When fighting with advantage, we should expect the fight to move towards the enemy, leading to more safe space for us to work with. But here's something you might not have thought about. While of course we want to play aggressively and push into this new space, we don't want to take unnecessary risks whenever we have advantage. This means not taking duels for too long, making sure you have cooldowns for safety, and of course, when needed, backing up to your team. The reason we do this is because we don't want to potentially risk flipping the team fight into the enemy's favor by dying to an unnecessary exposure. Think of it this way. If we start a fight 5 versus 5 and we find an early pick, that makes it a 5 versus 4, as long as we stay together. But then as soon as one of us rushes off to take an aggressive flank and try to keep snowballing that advantage, and they find themselves dueling an enemy, if they lose that duel, which is just a 1v1 on the flank, then the fight quickly changes to a 4 versus 4, and we're right back to where we started. And of course, on the other side of things, the opposite is true as well. When we find ourselves at an early disadvantage, we might need to take more risks in order to salvage what's left of a potential teamfight. You'll have to act fast if you want to try and turn the teamfight back in your team's favor by moving and peeking aggressively, potentially trying to find advantageous duels where enemies are forced into 1v1 situations. Once you get consistent at reading the big stuff like kills and ultimates being used, you'll be able to apply this same logic to smaller advantages like just having a high ground over an opponent or being able to trade out favorably with your cooldowns. Moving on, my next tip is to have an answer for every problem. You never quite know what's going to happen when you queue into a comp game in Overwatch 2, So don't try to take any lingering expectations from your previous match into your next one. Be ready to face and adapt to new problems. This is where having a more diverse hero pool pays off for a flexible player. While you might be able to one trick and have a clear idea of what you're trying to do on any given hero, the problems you're facing in a game might not allow you to reach that end game. So instead, you might need to swap playstyles or even change heroes in order to get past those hurdles and give yourself a good chance of winning your interactions. Overall, the advice here is to not try and fit that square peg into a round hole. Understand your weaknesses both as a player and with your given hero choice, and try to adapt to that. Be ready for any situation by understanding your limitations. And that leads me to my final tip for the video, which is to please, for the love of God, please stop running it down mid. Whether it's because of autopiloting, a lack of creativity, or simply not knowing any other options, I've seen players at every rank from bronze to top 500 fail to learn from this advice. So unless you have a very clear advantage over your enemies in the front line, either by having stronger frontline heroes, more damage output, or more defensive cooldowns, you want to play for more creative angles and play more areas around the map in general. If the next time you're walking up to a choke point and you see an enemy Orisa, Junkrat, and Bastion on the other side, you might want to rethink your options. And unless your team is willing to swap to heroes that can outpace even the best in the front line, or at the very least match them, your best bet is to play for angles. The thing about heroes with extremely high damage output or extremely strong defensive cooldowns is that they usually lack mobility. Try, even as a solo member, to take angles on the flank or on high grounds around those chokes to make sure that you're able to apply pressure from a safe distance that either forces the enemy team to ignore you or force a long rotation. And don't forget, this can be used in multiple different ways to either start a fight with advantage for your team or to finish out an existing advantage. By flanking and taking the enemy's attention off of the choke, you might allow safe passage for the rest of your team. Or if you're on the flank looking for kills, you can instead wait for your team to force out high value cooldowns at the choke and then jump on those high priority targets. Pretty much every single area on every single map has 2 or more options for taking space around it. So make sure you're looking for that path of least resistance, not just trying to travel in a straight line. There's really no excuse to not look for this kind of space, so I better not see any more of you Roadhog players running straight at that Orisa. We actually pulled this topic from the comments section of one of our previous videos. If you have any ideas for other types of videos you want to see on the channel, please let us know down in the comments. And that's all the tips for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And of course, if you're looking for more content like this, you should check out the GameLeap website. We've got hundreds of guides for Overwatch 2, as well as plenty of other games that will go more in depth than the average stuff you find on YouTube. We've got courses organized by role and by hero, step-by-step ability and map guides, and lots more. So be sure to check it out. Click this link to get your membership started.